I think for our industry, like digital identity is newer, and part of it is learning how it all fits together and how do you talk about it. So one of the things that I had to unravel is how do you explain this to first your leaders? Then how do they explain it to their leaders? And then how do you explain it to guests? Right. And I did have the opportunity at Identity Week to roll out like what is our plan for digital identity. And to this group, digital identity might mean a great many things. So we defined it kind of narrowly at like if you were a traveler on day of travel, you can use a government-based ID in a digital format to get through your day of travel. And essentially, to sum it up, we want you to be able to use your face or your phone at every touch point during day of travel. That's Alaska's goal.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Oh, not so bad. Yourself?
I'm doing well. I was actually working a little bit earlier on a LinkedIn survey, right? And so you have very limited characters. You can only make your choices like 40 characters long. So I'm not even sure if I'm going to post this question, but what I wanted to get at was, we've been talking about this recommendation or kind of like the basic standard that MFA is everywhere. That's like level 1 maturity. But look, I'm not breaking any new ground here, but I think that level 1 maturity of MFA is everywhere is really covered by adaptive authentication or contextual authentication, where you performed an MFA at some point, and there's some kind of device recognition going on to know that you haven't changed your context so much or changed your risk profile significantly enough to warrant prompting you again. And if you have, it should prompt you again. That's kind of my going in assumption. And I think it's good because I think having to do MFA 15 times a day or 25 times a day would be completely irritating and turn people off from this whole thing. What do you think?
Well, yeah, that's the whole reason I think that we spent a lot of time developing conditional adaptive rules. I will say I'm very happy that Marriott seems to have implemented this recently. I'm no longer getting prompted like every day to put in a second factor. So shout out to the Marriott team. I definitely appreciate that enhancement to your authentication stack. But that's what it's there for, right? We want to use risk and data associated with your identities to try and provide the most secure but most usable passage into whatever resources you're trying to get to. So I think it's a great thing. I mean, what's to argue against on that one?
No, I just think that sometimes you take things too literally. MFA everywhere, kind of, the first reading of that might be that, yes, for MFA on every interaction or every new session. And you're right, like that looks like that might have been the case with Marriott, and I'm not trying to pick on Marriott, but if your session timed out, you're in the middle of booking a hotel, not only did you need to log in with your credential, but you also had to go through an MFA, and I think theirs was one-time password SMS. Mm-hmm. That's just irritating.
It is, and that's why I'm a fan of using it. But to do it effectively, you do need the data, right? Has your context changed? Have you changed locations or browser or device, right? These are all different fingerprinting, methods to make sure that, this is still Jim that's still trying to book this, or no, it's just Jeff. He left a Marriott window open for another 8 hours because he got sidetracked booking a hotel room, right? I'm picking on Marriott, but I like Marriott. I'm platinum with them or whatever it is. So
yeah, no, and I'm titanium for life, by the way.
Yes, titanium. So. Sorry, I forgot there was the higher level. Yes. We don't want to be with the peasants at the platinum level.
Yeah, exactly. Staying in the same room. So I think let's be clear about something though, which is, okay, we're, this MFA everywhere, yes, it's internal, external, but let's take to the internal context. You log in, you provide your MFA, maybe it's once a day, maybe it's even more than that. I don't think in most cases companies are, tuning the dials to say, oh, if you do this, that, the other, it affects your risk score in this way. And then this resource is this, that, and the other risk level. And then there's a pairing. I think conceptually that's how it works. But I think there's a bit of a black box going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, well, I think there's probably default policies that probably are the starting point. And then if you're a tweaker, you can always go in and make adjustments. If it's Microsoft, maybe it's a GPO or some other, configurations in the Azure environment, or if it's Okta, something similar, or Ping, or whatever you happen to be using. It doesn't surprise me, because I think you need a starting point. If you just give somebody Legos and no instructions, you're going to end up with some really jacked up looking stuff, right?
Sure.
Some people are going to turn it into works of art. Me, that thing's not going to fly in the real world. So you need to give somebody, a starting point to it. And I think that's where the default policies come in. But you want to make sure that those default policies are secure by design, and that they are, effective in what they do. And I think sometimes that's where maybe vendors get into a little bit of a challenge, is like, okay, well, we didn't opt to turn this checkbox on, and maybe we should have, right? You can make an argument around that side, but I think as long as, there is a starting point, that's probably a good thing, where people can at least start there and say, okay, I don't need to be, an Azure expert with 78 years of experience, building the cloud, which didn't exist 78 years ago, to develop an access management policy. I can click this button, and I'm trusting that my IDP of choice has gone at least to the length of having something that's relatively secure by design and usable for my users.
Yeah. So you used the term tweaker there, and I've been catching up on Breaking Bad, or watching it for the second time, actually. And I will tell you, most IAM practitioners are not tweakers. I can almost guarantee that.
They're tweakers of a different variety. So let's just keep it to the identity side of things. How about that?
All right,
identity
that sounds
tweakers.
good. Speaking of identity, we got some conference codes for people.
Yeah, let me read this off here. So we've got the first one coming up, and not too far away by the time people listen to this episode, is the European Identity and Cloud Conference 2025 in Berlin. This is putting on by the fine folks over at Cooper & Cole, who have been excellent hosts for us. We're going to be out there for the first time, Jim. First time attending the conference. It's May 6th through the 9th. We hope to see a lot of people out there that we know, make new friends as well. If you use the code IDAC25MKO, you get 25% off. So time is running out. I would imagine you really want to get flights booked, hotels booked, and get registered and all that good stuff to make it out there. So we're really looking forward to seeing that. You're going to spend some extra time out there doing a couple Identity beers maybe, or something like that. I know you kind of mentioned it before.
Yeah, I'm going to do at least one Identity beer, which would be in Oslo. That's going to be the Wednesday before EIC. And then there's an Identity beer gathering right before EIC. And I think it's so I forwarded you this information. It's officially the Netherlands branch of I think it's for ID Pro. And I'm not sure. So I'm kind of like sketching on some of those details, but reach out to me. I'll share the information. If you're interested, if you're going to EIC and you want to do that at Identity Beer, I'll share the info with you.
Yeah, I think you and I are thinking about seeing how we can get out there for that, and that'll be super cool. It'll be my first time doing it at a beer. At that point, you'll have been a pro with one under your belt, so you'll be the grizzled veteran.
I'm already kind of a grizzled veteran of drinking beer, so I think now I'm going to take my game to the next level.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. So after that, we've got Identiverse. That is June 3rd through the 6th. So that'll be in Las Vegas. And so it's kind of a busy few weeks there for us between Europe and then going to Vegas. Lots of people do it. So there'll be, no tears for us on the show doing that, other than me editing videos and putting shows together while I'm probably on a train somewhere between Berlin to Amsterdam, and then maybe on a flight from Amsterdam back to the US and then back to Vegas. But Identiverse is going to be fun. We've got a code for that one as well. IDV25-IDAC25. That gets you 25% off. So definitely want to take advantage of that. Just a reminder, it's at a new location this year. It's at Mandalay Bay, not at the Aria like it's been for the last couple of years. It's a bigger spot. So looking forward to seeing what the new digs look like for Identiverse this year.
Yeah, it'll be cool. And if people are looking for an inexpensive place to stay. The Luxor is connected with a walkway, right? So you can get rooms there for under $100 usually if you book in advance.
Yeah, but you want to stay at the Mandalay if you can.
Yeah.
Luxor's fine, but it is you get what you pay for from a room perspective.
Yeah, no, but hey, not everybody's like rolling in the money like you, Jeff.
I've made that trip many times between Luxor and Mandalay. It's a good 15-minute walk from there to the Mandalay Conference Center. I've done that many times. There was one time, I think it was a Black Hat, where I was at the conference. I had just left the conference, got back to my room, and then received an email saying, "Hey, you won some Bose headphones. You need to come back. You need to come pick them up." So I immediately turned around and went right on back to the conference, picked up my Bose headphones, and then walked right back to my room. So I got my workout that day for sure. But it's a good stuff. It's good stuff. It kept me healthy, right?
That's a good deal. Hey, one more thing we've got to announce, right? We're doing all these codes. We have to announce something that you put out there on LinkedIn, and the feedback that we got was super positive. We are now the official podcast of ID Pro.
Yeah, super cool. Something that we've been talking behind the scenes for the last couple of weeks, but it is official. And yeah, looking forward to it. You and I have both been members for years at this point. I know that I joined as a founding member back in 2017 or 2016, whatever that first one was. And I do some other things helping out with, like I helped out one year with the CID road tests, like putting questions together. I got one question on that was like my goal. Okay, I got one on the test. And then like board nomination stuff. But yeah, looking forward to it. ID Pro has always been good partners for us. It's just, it seems kind of natural. We have so many ID Pro people on the show anyway. Like, hey, why not do this?
It's totally a natural fit. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so that's exciting. You stole my thunder because I was going to mention too. But yeah, if you're interested, ID Pro, idpro.org, head on over there. I've long been a fan of it. We've talked about it before, but the membership fee alone is just totally worth it for the Slack channels and all the community and the conversations go on there. It's a lot of fun. So yeah, definitely check it out. We'll have more information as we kind of get things spun up. But yeah, it's exciting times. So all right, that's a lot of preamble. 11 minutes almost, 10 minutes of it. Why don't we get to our guest? She's been patiently waiting in the wings, laughing at my stupid jokes. And I'd like to introduce Kristin Olsen. She is the Director of Product Management for the Guest Travel Experience at Alaska Airlines. Welcome to Identity at the Center, Kristin.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so thanks so much for taking the time. We're going to cover kind of a lot today. I think what we'll kind of focus on is really sort of that product management in the IAM space and the customer experience and how those things kind of work together. But hey, it's your first time with us. We got to find out, how did you get to where you are? I just had a mouthful of an intro for you, Director of Product Management for the Guest Experience at Alaska Airlines. Tell me how you got into that role. And I'm curious, do you consider yourself an identity person, something else, a product manager, both? Like where are you thinking right now?
Yeah. I think depending on the day, I might have a different answer. I don't identify as identity person yet. I think that my world and identity is becoming quickly overlapping. So I think that it'll get closer and closer to being the same. And we'll talk more about what I'm working on. Getting into product management, honestly, one of my passions, I know a lot of people who probably listen to this podcast, their passion is identity or identity management. Mine has typically been process. Like, how do you have enough process without having too much process? And so I have spent a long time working on internal technology PMOs, so project management offices, and executing, getting work done. And their opportunity came over to focus on, now, not only do I get to execute what people tell me to, I get to decide what's the best thing for our guest experience and be able to push the industry actually in some areas. And that's been super exciting as well.
Well, Jim met you at the Identity Week America conference last year. You spoke at Identity Conference. So Jim, what does that mean?
I think it means she's an identity person.
The water is fine. Come on in. It's a very inviting group. So welcome to the identity. Identirati, I guess, that's kind of what we, call this sort of group of people. But let me know a little bit here about what your day-to-day is like. We talked to a lot of people, a lot of different backgrounds. Some are technical, some are not technical. I'm always curious in the product management side because I feel like IAM is a product that you put out for your organization, whether it is customer facing, whether it's enterprise. And if you don't have a good product, people are going to find ways around that. That might not be good from a risk perspective. So I'm curious, take me through sort of like what's a day like in your role, or maybe a week. Explain what a director of product management does.
Okay. So I lead product managers, if that wasn't obvious. So I lead about 12 product managers. And so I start from a guest journey perspective. When you travel, like when you're buying air travel, you buy a ticket and then you might manage that ticket and then you fly on that ticket. So I am accountable for all of the guest experience after you book that ticket. So everything from managing, check-in, airport, if it's guest facing, I own it. So part of that has been the identity piece, and we can dive deeper into that. So, but from a day-to-day perspective, it can be reviewing people's roadmaps. It can be talking about how we're getting to our 2025 goals, putting together revenue forecasts, and are we behind or ahead in those revenue forecasts? Looking at net promoter score to say, hey, people are going to the airport. Are they enjoying the new experience that we've given them? Or do we need to make some changes? And then that's interesting too, because you just dig and dig and dig on, is it the technology? Is it the agents? Is it the physical space itself? So lots of things to dig in and figure out how you're going to change and evolve that product.
It sounds like you have your hands in a lot of pies, so to speak, and you're having a lot of conversations. And it's not just technical stuff, right? It is usability. It is understanding, okay, where do we want to be and what are we trying to do? It's funny, interesting to me that you mentioned the net promoter score. And I'm just curious, as kind of a follow-up question to that is, where does identity and access management fit into that? Are there specific feedback items you get to say, I don't like this in the app, or I love this in the app, or I don't like the way this works on the website? Like, help me understand the identity components of maybe how that might affect a net promoter score.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the interesting thing about net promoter score is because you're going from like all the way from booking to like after you fly and do you have your bag and those things, right? When a company is asking about asking questions to get to the net promoter score, they have to decide, there's like all these episodes of what they ask. And like one of them might be like, how was your experience on the website? So you don't know if that's, how was your login experience? How was this? We do have other indicators. Like we use other tools on our website to say, where's the friction on the website? And we can dig into that tool to say, it's clear that login, I don't know if anybody else has this, but login is a key issue for guests. And it could be that they just, haven't used our website in a long time. It could be a lot of things. So we actually have other places that gives us better data to look at from an identity perspective than the NPS. It would fit super generically in a wide box at this point is the actual answer.
And I imagine it's like, okay, well, I had a problem at the airport. That impacts the entire experience, right? And like you said, I think like if I have a problem, everything can go great. And then you get to where you're going and, for whatever reason, something happens and maybe a bag doesn't show up or a flight is delayed, whatever it might be. And then that's the last impression. That might affect the entire feedback, right? They're not thinking about all the things that went right to get to that point.
Yes, absolutely. And we can dig more into this too, but we're working on using digital identity in the lobby and kind of throughout the actual day of travel experience. And at Identity Week, that's what I was focused on. And, the key pillar to that is actually getting through security and with TSA. And so you only have so much you can do to impact that guest experience. So we're giving them the opportunity to use digital identity where it's available with TSA, but we have very little control over how that experience is executed for our guests.
You can only control what you can control, and that's pretty much it, right?
That's right.
So you mentioned that Identity Week America talk. Give us a rundown of what that talk was about for people who weren't there and kind of just give us a synopsis of it.
Yeah, I think for our industry, like digital identity is newer, and part of it is learning how it all fits together and how do you talk about it. So one of the things that I had to unravel is, how do you explain this to first your leaders? Then how do they explain it to their leaders? And then how do you explain it to guests, right? And I did have the opportunity at Identity Week to roll out like, what is our plan for digital identity? And to this group, digital identity might mean a great many things. So we defined it kind of narrowly at like, if you were a traveler on day of travel, you can use a government-based ID in a digital format to get through your day of travel. And essentially, to sum it up, we want you to be able to use your face or your phone at every touch point during day of travel. That's Alaska's goal.
That's a pretty cool goal. So you mentioned this day of travel. For folks who aren't initiated into this, what does day of travel mean exactly from your perspective?
Yeah. So day of travel to me can mean everything from like you're on the website or in the app and you're managing your trip. You might be adding a bag, you might be adding food, to checking in. So telling us you're coming and getting a boarding pass. So then you typically get a QR code for that. And then you actually travel. So you come to the airport. You would use your phone for us. You just scan your barcode. And if you've checked bags, your bag takes just spit out at you. So it's a less than 40-second experience there. Dropping a bag. So we also have to ID you when you drop a bag. And then getting the guests through security and then all the way to on the plane. So I support even some of the pre-order food that's on the plane. And then when you get to your destination, do you know where you're going? Do you know where your bags are? Did your bags arrive? Did we tell you your bags arrived? And right now, that's kind of day of travel. I definitely can see that expanding over time of like, how do we help you get to your hotel? Or how do we get you logged into your Bonvoy account so you can pick your hotel because you just got to Vegas and you thought you were going to stay with a friend or something like that. So day of travel, it to me is pretty broad, but it should be like, this is your travel experience as a guest. That's why my title is so long.
So, Kristin, I think when people think about identity outside of this identity world, they think of login. And we sometimes, when we talk to a lot of identity practitioners and we ask the question, what's the difference between IAM and digital identity? And everybody has a different answer to that, but I kind of think of IAM as kind of like the nuts and bolts, but digital identity to me is really what you're talking a lot about, which is how do you take that identity and expand it much further? Seems like you dip your toe in the water with both. I won't ask you to answer that question unless you want to, but talk to me a little bit about this digital identity and how it goes beyond login for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. So how I think about this is it's how do you get through the airport using your face or your phone as your digital identity. So we can talk about logging to websites and things like that, which we probably shouldn't talk about. That's not my background, but it's like, how do you give guests the opportunity in the airport to be able to use? So face, we're currently using the TSA's Touchless Identity Solution Program. So you have to sign up through your mileage plan account or opt in to use that day of travel experience. You get a special icon on your boarding pass that says you can use that line at security. And we're also unlocking that experience from your bag drop. So you don't have to pull out your ID. You can just use your face. We're like, yes, you're validated. So what that's doing is it's just putting you in a gallery for the day of travel for that airport for that 24 hours. And then that gallery gets wiped out for the next day of travelers. So that's the TSA's touchless identity solution that we want to use in multiple places. But right now we're just working on rolling that out with them and with other airlines.
Yeah. So I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. So obviously I'm not flying in Alaska very often. But with the airline that I use, they do have that where you can just walk up and not present a boarding pass or an identity or anything and just do facial recognition. I've already kind of come to the conclusion that they already have my picture. They already know who I am. So I'm okay. If it can get me through line 10 minutes faster, I'm going to do it. But I've got to also think that a lot of people have concerns. I mean, are you guys hearing feedback around privacy concerns? Like, what are you guys doing? How did this work, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I think initially there were a lot of concerns about that. We have a couple different principles for Alaska that we're following right now, which is the guests can opt into that experience, right? So nobody's forced to use that experience. You totally you have to physically go and opt into that experience. So if you don't want to do that, you absolutely do not have to do that. There's always a manual way to do that. And then, I mean, we're using the TSA's program directly. So one of the things that we have a principle around is not storing any biometric data or information. So like you said, Jim, a lot of people already know because you have a passport and you have a KTN to be able to opt into that program, which is a requirement, that the government already has your picture. And they're just using it to make your day of travel easier. And it's actually a benefit to people who go through the pre-check program.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I kind of like focus right on the probably small population of people who are like not wanting to do it. But have you mostly gotten positive feedback? Is like the 80-20 rule in effect where most people are loving this?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the people, we haven't had anybody have negative feedback for us on it because, again, they don't have to use this program. So I think for the people who want to use it, they use it. It's not our program. We just want to unlock it for our guests. I think there's also working with the other airlines to make sure that guests can understand a single process. So if you go to Atlanta, if you're in Atlanta, you have a very deep line because that was one of the first locations. And if you go to DCA, you have a similar process there. So one of the things we're doing is working across airlines to say, here's what digital identity looks like for day of travel, working with the airlines, TSA, and the physical airports. So we're not using the term digital identity here or virtual over here or TIS here. We want to make sure that if we all use a common language for guests who fly, they're not trying to learn a new program based on which airport they're at. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. You know, I think it's really exciting what you do. Like you get to kind of paint the vision and talk about like, okay, these are the things that if we can do them, make this guest experience awesome. Now your technologists have to actually take your vision and make it happen. So maybe they have the harder job, but I'm kind of wondering like, how does that partnership work where you're bringing them all these great ideas and they've got to actually make them happen?
Yeah. That reminds me of the first time I started. I had a couple colleagues who gave me like an initial deck that's like, here's digital identity. And I went through it. I'm like, I had to kind of like reformat it for my own brain to make it work. And then I had to reformat it to get it to leaders so the leaders could generally understand it. And so by going through that deck, I had the opportunity to really like lay out how to talk about it and what that looked like.
You know, the technologists have to take your vision and make it happen. So, you know, in some ways I'm like, okay, they've got the hard job, right? You got this vision of like, you want to create the awesome travel experience and it means doing this, and this, and they've got to figure out how to make that happen. So how do you make that collaboration happen? How do you avoid, you know, them not being able to build or that you get yourself into a tricky situation where they feel pressured to make something work, but they maybe know it's not the right thing to do? Or what does that collaboration look like?
Yeah. So the first time that I was going through the original deck that somebody put together and I was parsing that out, I started putting together what we call marketecture slides. Right. So I went like, we're going to have 4 galleries. We're going to have a gallery from this provider and a gallery from TSA and a gallery. I still have that side. It makes me laugh. So part of it is what could we do versus what should we do? What can guests understand? And then I think engineering's pretty much been on board once they understand.
I guess it's not strange to hear engineering on board because I think they generally want to put stuff in. but I imagine you have to rein them in sometimes too, right?
Well, I would say that like we're actually just starting to do some of the build since the first integration was with TSA. That happened pretty quickly, we are doing more and more of it. And so I do think that the part from an engineering perspective is, and then why I think this space is so exciting is because the airline industry has a lot of like normal things that have been happening for 60 years, right? And so when you get to dig in and be like, here is a brand new space, I get to go talk about it at conferences. They get to be some of the first people to put the technology together to unlock it for guests. Like that's what engineers love doing, I think, right? It's like problem solving a real problem. And part of it goes to like, well, we already have ideas. What problem are we trying to solve? But I think the other piece is getting guests through spaces efficiently. And having agents check IDs or having TSA check IDs is great, but already knowing who you are is way faster. So it speeds up the line, especially if you have a dedicated line like Jimmy you're talking about in Atlanta. We have new automated bag drops. And so using one-to-end technology for ID verification there greatly speeds things up. And then also future use at the gate. So engineers are super excited to work on this because, I mean, it's great to work on making the check-in process better, but the check-in process hasn't changed that much. And it's really great to be in a newish space, especially newer for airlines and being able to unlock that for guests.
I feel like there's a lot of pressure when you're working on the customer side of IAM because you're dealing with everybody. And if you make a mistake, you're going to hear about it, right? Whether it's, I don't like the way that color looks on that page, all the way to, an actual outage, right? Or downtime or things like that. There's got to be a lot of pressure it's not a pressure that you typically see on the enterprise side for most organizations where, okay, yeah, we screwed up, but there are employees and they kind of have to do what we want. Anyway, customers are fickle and they will go and shift mindset quite a bit. Would you say that that's a fair representation, and just specifically from the identity side of saying, yes, customer does have a lot of that sort of that customer facing experience is such an important part for customer IAM compared maybe to the enterprise side?
Yeah, I definitely think that experience is it's super important to get right for guests. And we spend a lot of time working. We have a whole group dedicated to guest experience. So we work directly with them on, are these colors going to work? How's this experience? Do we need signage? You can't have a sign in an airport that takes longer than 5 seconds to read, or no one will read it. We do have like digital signage now in Seattle and Portland, and it can be dynamic and do all sorts of things. So I think that also helps with guest experience. But back to identity. For day of travel right now, we have the TSA program, which is it's pretty prescriptive. Like you put icon on boarding pass gets you in line. I am interested. So it's interesting because we basically are using others' programs to get us through this first phase of day of travel, digital identity. So I've talked about face a lot, but phone based, mobile driver's license, Google ID pass. Washington State does not have legislation yet for mobile IDs. So I am an Android person. It's very controversial. But I can put my own passport in my wallet with ID pass that's verified using my chip. And so now when I go to security, this is gonna get security nerdy, but hopefully that's okay. The CAT2s, which are the credentialing machines at security, have tap to ID. I don't know if everybody calls it that, but that's just the easiest way to explain it. So I can tap to ID using my Google ID pass, or if you like California, I think up to 13 states right now have that available. So either it's teaching guests about you have these options. That's what we have right now. And so it's kind of I'm in control of kind of this gap between getting people, like I need to get people to understand it and how to do it during day of travel, but I don't totally own what that experience looks like from a face and phone perspective. I think as they get more and more like, how do we connect your digital identity that I've been talking about with Face or Phone with your IAM strategy for web and app, I think that's going to be like the more interesting, challenging spot.
Hey, Kristin, I'm kind of wondering how trends that are happening in the industry maybe implement some of the things that you want to take care of. So I'm not sure how familiar you are with passkeys, but passkeys is a way to basically do cross-device within the same platform, cross-device sign-on. I'm also thinking of things like, Face ID or thumbprint within the device to avoid having to sign on. Are those things that you see those and then you're like, hey, why don't we bring that to Alaska Airlines? Or is it mostly that you're starting from some other place to get the idea and then you see what technology is available?
Yeah, I think that with Day of Travel, we're focused on what exists and then looking at how do we put that under a larger identity umbrella and what do we want to do? So looking at what are the trends and what's out there, and then do we want to move forward and have a bigger identity program at airports outside of Face and Phone that are, again, like mostly other people's programs. We can accept, we'd have to do the technology to accept a mobile driver's license at something like the automatic bag drops. But I think as we widen that identity net, or maybe cast it over all the things, I think that's an opportunity there. I think the other thing that's more in Day of Travel space is like electronic visas, electronic document verification, how do we get you all of your documentation electronically and know that you have that from an authentication perspective, authenticated documents, so that you have a really seamless day of travel. So if you're, going around the world in the air, right? How do you have all those things just on your phone? And the technology from airports and airlines and governing bodies can use that to make that a really seamless day of travel.
Well, I'm just going to put a vote in now for a feature enhancement, which is kill the password. Passwords stink, right? I think we can all agree with that. And there's nothing more irritating than Day of Travel. You're at one of these steps and the app logs you out. And that's, so anything that can kill the password, I'm all for. And I think a lot of people would be all for.
I don't want to interject, Kristin, but I think Jim and I experience very similar issues with a particular airline that we happen to fly. So this is a plea to everyone in this space: adopt passkeys, adopt WebAuthn. Fido has done a lot of good work on that. So I will just say I hear you, Jim, and I echo that 100%. There's nothing that I hate more than being in line to scan my boarding pass to actually get on the plane and it has logged me out. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, I mean, I just say that's also why we want to be able to use your face to board, right? So you can just walk on. And when we have that with international flights, but when is the change management around using digital identity for Day of Travel? When are guests and airports going to be ready for that change? I think it isn't that we can't do it technically already. We can, but I don't think people are like, why would you need my face? Right. Or people are still like, do you need my ID to board the plane? You're like, no, you've been authenticated at least a few times.
Yeah. The real ID apocalypse is coming soon. I think for a lot of airports where people are showing up without their real ID. And in the US, for people who are listening around the world, there's been sort of an update into the way that your driver's license in different states have been more secured, and not everybody has this version yet. It requires them typically going to a DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles office, to get that taken care of and prove identity and things like that. But behaviors are really hard to change in the real world, and I think these are almost decade-long transitions. If you think about when did Face ID first come out from Apple, and I give them a lot of credit for really doing a good job of marketing it and making it very simple to use, makes it really usable for more people, right? Now, grandma and grandpa are using Face ID and Touch ID, and they're using biometrics. If you had thought about that 20 years ago, it's like, oh, that's way too complicated, right? Or now we're doing text messages with, one-time passwords or so all this stuff is very cyclical. And I'm curious to hear what does the risk decision look like for you, Kristin? You talk about day of travel, right? And things have to go right on day of travel, or there are going to be problems. Either I can't log into my app and I can't get past TSA, or the stupid app logged me out as I was trying to show my ticket to get on board. Now I'm holding up a line behind me, holding up boarding process. I'd imagine that there's probably a risk decision that gets made somewhere to say, we're probably less risk adverse on day of travel because that needs to execute flawlessly without a hitch 100% of the time. But there may be an opportunity before that or after that to maybe play with some things that maybe are a little more, risk tolerant or, risk appropriate to kind of do the things. And I'm curious if that makes sense and how you approach managing, digital identity across both of those areas.
Yeah, I mean, if we have all of day of travel, how I would segment that so that we can be riskier in some areas is by who's traveling or the type of traveler, right? You may have a family that's like super tech savvy. You may have individuals that travel, they commute from Seattle, they might commute to San Jose, right? And so we can be riskier with that type of traveler. And I don't mean riskier, I just mean like give them other opportunities that other travelers would not want to take, right? And so I think we support that from the opt-in perspective of opting into using your face during day of travel. Like Jim, you were talking about using it in Atlanta, right? So people travel so frequently up and down the East Coast as well that you want to have that lane so that you know that you don't have to stand and go around and around and around in Atlanta in that pre-check lane. And you can just go to the TSA touchless identity lane. So we want to make sure that people have more and more opportunities to do that at more and more airports because there's only 10 right now. And we can talk more about that. But I do think that we think about risk. And I'd say, Jeff, that's how I break it down is how can we start with something? I mean, it's like not everybody got the iPhone when it first came out, right? Or I didn't understand why you would need an iPad at the time. Right now, I definitely understand that. That's dating myself a little bit. But there's always going to be a group who wants to try something new. And then you have that change curve, and that just goes directly into product management from like a maturity perspective. And how do you get the most people, make the most money? But first you have to have that early adopter to use some of that.
Do you think there's an opportunity for like an early adopter program when it comes to things like this, where you can encourage people who are, I'll say nerds like me who are trying to be on the cutting edge of things and are willing to try new things at the expense of, some things might not work as expected. Do you think that's something that you could take advantage of as being maybe not, for Alaska Airlines, right? But maybe if I'm a product manager, can I tap into that mindset to help me troubleshoot or validate that the ideas that I have from an identity perspective work?
Yeah, I absolutely think that's true. I think that there's a couple different things. Like we have an internal experimentation team. We have, we've had workshops on design thinking. But I think that it could be tapping into other communities to say, how do you think about this differently? Like one of the things with product management is, I'm sure I'm not the only one that says this. I'm like, we don't have to be the first to make up a feature. Like we don't have to be the first to launch X feature. We just have to be really good at copying other industries because the airlines have an opportunity to leapfrog. I don't know if we're there, but I think that we are making really good strides in technology. So how do we look at other industries to say, how are they doing groups? How do you do the group order on maybe a sandwich shop that is a national chain? How would that work for groups booking on airlines? So I think that absolutely go back to your question, tapping into other industries to say, let's talk about how this would work. How would you think about this? Is an absolutely great idea. Sounds like I'm going to go to some more conferences.
Well, you're part of the identity crew now, so you have to be there and share some of these stories and ideas. I think that's how we all learn. I want to pivot the conversation to what I call the AI at the center part of our podcast. It feels like AI is everywhere. And I'm curious, where do you see AI impacting how product management is done, especially in the identity space? Have you given any thought about how that might impact the way things get done or how you go about implementing new features or things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that like one of the super awesome things that Alaska did, it wasn't necessarily my team, was this goes back to what I said earlier, like how do you just take an idea from different industry? So we have an AI feature on our website where you just type in like, I want to go to a beach, I want to use my miles, and I want to go in July, right? And it just brings you back all of like, here are your options, right? And then you get Vegas. And you're like, well, why would I have Vegas? That's not a beach. And there's like a little description under that's like, there are many beach-like pools in Las Vegas, right? So, I mean, even going from like, why do you make me like standard airline websites? Why do you make me put in every single piece of information when I just want you to tell me like, I only have this idea over here. So when I'm always like, when are we going to move from like, here's your Google box at the top of your website instead of like, I'm going on this date and I'm leaving on this date and I want to have use miles and I want to do this and I want to do this and I want to do this. So that's exciting AI stuff we've already done. But from an identity perspective and a product management perspective, I think that we are using some tools to be more productive from a product management perspective. Like even if you have a 30% start on something, putting together your roadmap or putting together like, here's a deck on initial starting on digital identity, and then ideating from there, at least it gets you a start there that you don't have to start at the very beginning.
Are there any future trends that you've been looking at? And it's like, okay, from an identity perspective, it's like, ooh, this might be something we want to impact. We talked about like passkeys and passwordless kind of goes along with that. Are there things like that you see coming in the identity space? You're like, okay, we've got to be prepared for that.
I not that I can think of offhand. I'm sure that there are things I should, but since my area is super broad, it's like, I have one product manager focused on digital identity. I do think that it's going to take a while just to get guests understanding what digital identity is and how do you use your face or phone and why would you use your face or phone. So I think that the change curve is going to be long from a digital identity perspective. But again, it does help to have other airlines, the TSA, airports, all working together in the same goal, because it does provide better throughput, more efficiencies, better security for our guests and the other travelers on day of travel.
Yeah, I can't remember the last time I printed out a ticket. I think it was because of an error in an app that I had to go do it. It's very rare that I fly, 100 flights a year. So I'm constantly in the airports. And so please work with your partners out there. Just like make that easier, right? I'm a fan for anything. If you need tester, hit me up. I'm always happy to do that stuff. I want to know what your vision is for how this is going to work in the future, right? From a digital identity perspective, because I have ideas, and let me kind of maybe plant some seeds and feel free to take this as if you'd like. But I have my phone with me, or I have some sort of device. I go into the airport. You mentioned that I think it's almost like the tap to pay, but it's like tap to authenticate, right?
Yeah.
I think most people are familiar with the QR code, but that's still a little bit of a clunky experience, because what happens when you turn your phone over? The screen goes off sometimes. And they're like, oh, I got to do that again. And I think like a tap to authenticate or tap to board would be interesting. I think just having my phone on me as I go through, a checkpoint or something where I don't have to do those sorts of things might be interesting. Maybe it's boarding after I've gone through security boarding, something that it might be. Maybe it's tracking bags if I've checked them. There's some way to show me exactly where the bags are, and is my bag going to be first or is it going to be last? How much time do I have to get a drink or go to the bathroom, whatever it may be? I think of these things of like the experience of how this might work. And I'm curious what your vision of the day of travel looks like in the future.
Yeah, I think those are great ideas. So thank you. I've mentally written those down. So I go back to face or phone, right? So face being TSA gallery. And I think as we move forward, do we have other galleries? So people are members of programs that get them through security faster. There might be other digital identity providers that we want to use in future that are gallery based. So one-to-N face verification, airport during day of travel. So just expanding that from TSA. We've talked about that. Could you actually use your mobile driver's license while you check in to say, and this is just an idea we're floating around, to say, use my authenticated credential from my DMV for day of travel. And so then that credential or that picture and information would go into a different gallery or thin gallery. And then, tap to ID, I think is just the easiest way to put it because people already know tap to pay and this is exactly the same thing, right? So how can you use your phone everywhere to say this is either, so for me, it's not only, so there are times in the airport where you have to actually show your ID, and there's other times we just need to know who you are. So I want to get to a spot where you don't need a QR code for your boarding pass. We will still have them for people who enjoy QR codes, but how do we build that in so you can just tap everywhere you need? We just need to know who you are. Sometimes we need to know exactly who you are and to make sure that you're the same person. And other times we just need to be able to identify you to say, this is your passenger record, and to let you on the plane or to let you in the lounge and things like that. So I really want to either be able to tap to ID or use your face for every touch point during day of travel. I would add.
Okay.
I think the other thing is how do we, and I already mentioned this, that is, how do we use electronic verification for visas and other things? Again, if you have a long list of places you're traveling to make sure you have every single document that you need and make that an easier experience. One, you have the right documents. So they've been verified because sometimes you're like, this is what the website says, but it's really unclear. I don't even know if I can get into Canada with a birth certificate, right? Because the website to me was not very clear. So give the guests more assurance and make it seamless.
Well, I think that highlights how important it is to work with, the partners in the air travel space, right? You mentioned TSA, different governments. I mean, Jim and I are going to Berlin here in a few weeks. I'm hoping someone will tell me what I need to do. I'm going to bring my passport and then fill out whatever forms I need to do. So I'm kind of relying on the airline to help me through that process and sort of shepherd me through it. I'm curious, that vision that you just described, how far away do you think that is? And I'm not going to hold you and say, hey, Kristin from Alaska Airlines said it's going to be in place next year, but tell me, are we 2 years away, 5 years away, 10 years away from that vision?
I'd say the constraint is not the technology. The constraint is the change management curve. So how quickly do you roll something out and then have people not use it? So how do you pace the rollout of technology with the change curve? So those things are close enough together that you can get buy-in from your leaders to spend that money, even though you don't have a clear ROI or the ROI is a little bit mismatched. So I think that's what it comes down to. So I would say that my answer is by, before the end of 2027, I'd say.
Okay, so a lot sooner than I was thinking. Maybe it might take longer, but I think that's great. I'll take it as soon as we can get it. You've been really generous with your time, so I want to make sure I, get you out of here and you can get on with your day and keep fixing identity things. But I was getting to know you a little bit before we hit record, and I was like, all right, we ended the show on a lighter note, and we're always looking for interesting things to talk about. And you brought up something that I don't think we've ever had a guest on, at least not that has talked about it, that you mentioned that you have an improv comedy background, which I'm a huge fan of comedy. I lived in Chicago for 40 years and made many, many trips to Second City, which is sort of a mecca for a lot of improv comedians. And there's been a lot of people come out of that. I'm curious. I want to go back to your improv comedy days. Can you give me like a memorable time, maybe like a scene that you were doing, either completely died, because everybody loves a good bombing story when it comes to like, oh, that joke fell flat, or went like way better than you thought it would for any type of reason? I'm curious to hear like a story from your improv comedy days.
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. So in my 20s, just a few years ago, I was part of a troupe called Lipstick. And we were actually we typically did short format, but we were working on long format. And typically what you do is you decide what format you want to do. And we decided we were going to, like, sometimes it'd be a sitcom, or maybe you're doing film noir. We decided to do Charlie's Angels. So Lipstick was an all-female troupe, but we had our coach was a guy from our local improv troupe, and he was fantastic. So we were doing like a competition, and we were doing our Charlie's Angels. And I would say that that was like one of the best. I know people have a bombing story, but you try to forget those as quickly as possible, especially a couple years afterwards. But it was just so amazing to like go through the cadence of everything that happens in a long form show and like nail it and be funny and be interesting and develop a story. And you know, you just like it's when you roll off stage or you get out of a meeting, you're like, nailed it. And so that was one of my best memories on the improv side.
You get kind of like a performance high, right? When it's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
that went really well. And, you know, we do that on the podcast too. We have a good show. It's like, yeah, that went really well. Or if we're doing, you know, public speaking, I'm sure that, you know, I've heard that before as well. This Charlie's Angels thing, was it a stage show? Was it like somebody was doing like home video? Like, take me behind the scenes. Like, what were some of the things that were really kind of stood out from that day?
Yeah. So we, you know, we practice because you have to kind of get the format down, and you'd switch roles. So sometimes you'd be an angel, and other times you'd be other characters, or you'd be the main guy. I forgot
Charlie,
his name.
I think.
So
Right? Charlie, it was Charlie, the voice of the speaker, right?
yes, but who was the other guy?
And Charlie's Angels?
Yeah, there was another guy. Okay.
Oh, I don't know.
We actually did it at a local. There was a competition at a local Jet City Improv is one of our bigger establishments here from an improv perspective. And they were doing like Sunday nights where they would invite troops in, and we would like compete against each other. So we would do that show, and I think we did it every Sunday for a month through the competition kind of thing. So it was definitely on stage in front of an audience of friends and other people who actually paid to come watch. So that was fun.
I know someone out there is yelling. Maybe it's even Jim, but it's Bosley is the other character.
Bosley.
I'm trying to think of. Is that right, Jim? Bosley?
I have no idea, but it sounds right.
Jim, do you think we could do improv comedy? I mean, you could argue this show is 100% improv comedy.
It pretty much is. Yeah, it's pretty much a laughing stock. No, you know, the closest experience I have to all this was, well, there were two things. One, when I was like under 13, we used to do like we would have like a tape recorder, and we had like a little microphone that went in the tape recorder, and we would do like a variety show. And then we would play it back and laugh and stuff like that. And then I've always been somebody who likes to do crank calls. I mean, not as an adult, okay, as a kid.
Yeah, way to cover that up, Jim. You just did one yesterday, I'm sure.
Well, nobody answers their phone anymore. So unless you know the number coming through, and then it's not quite the crank call anymore, right? But we would call people and just record it. And I mean, all the way through college, do crank calls. The best crank call that we ever did was living in the dorms, and we called one of the guys in the dorm, and there was a pizza place around nearby. It was called the Sugar Bowl. And what they would do is they would come to the lobby of the dorm, and they would call you from the downstairs phone and say, Sugar Bowl in the lobby, and then hang up. So we called this guy, Sugar Bowl in the lobby, hang up. And you could hear him saying, there's a guy named Mark. He's like, I didn't order Sugar Bowl. And so like waited about 2 minutes, call him back, Sugar Bowl in the lobby, hang up. And you could hear him saying, I didn't order a Sugar Bowl, right? So then a couple minutes later, go down to his bedroom and just pound on the door. And he opened the door and he looked so scared. And it was a big laugh. So
You sound like a bully, man.
no, we would play gags on each other. I was on the receiving end as much as on the giving end.
I don't know. So I've always been more of an introvert, and I'm always curious as to, is this something that like you guys sound like you're a little more extrovert, and especially at the younger ages maybe, but were you always like that, or is it like a learned skill? Because I know there's a lot of introverts like me who are like, I really don't like talking in front of people. I do it because I kind of force myself to do it. But how did you get over that sort of that anxiety or that fear? I'm Kristin.
Yeah,
what's your thought?
I don't have that. So I'm happy to stand up and talk in front of anybody. Obviously, Identity Week. I had to know what I was talking about. But I mean, from a pretty young age, people are like, she's loud, she's got a face that does a lot of things, we should put her on stage. So I did like high school theater. I did some theater after high school, and then I just needed something. And so I found improv. But one of the places I worked for a long time, they had a Toastmasters class. And so the Toastmaster people were like, hey, Kristin, we know you have an improv background. Do you want to come do improv with the Toastmasters? So Jeff, that's exactly what you're talking about. So I would come during lunch and we would do games, and we did it for like 5 or 6 different sessions. And by the end, the Toastmaster group was like, they just would write the games on the board and would orchestrate everything. And that's like that progression from like, one of the warm-up activities with improv is word ball, which is like, I'm just thinking of a word and throwing it to you, right? Like ball. And people will stand there like, what's the word? What's the word I need? What's the right word? You're like, all you need to do is say another word. So going from not being able to do that to like running all of the improv games for Toastmasters, that was amazing to see. So I got to see a lot of growth and have improv really bring along that group.
Well, you're what I would call a natural, right? You and been able to do that. For me, it's been more of a learned behavior, I guess. I mean, we do this podcast and we talk to millions of listeners every day, right? I think that's where we're up to, galactic level listenership. And I get on stage now. We do things like, we did Fido Feud Gym where we were on stage. That was a lot of fun. I think it's been something that I've consciously tried to work on over the last probably 5 years, maybe 6 years, is kind of get on there. But I still find it extremely draining sometimes to be like, okay, I could take a deep breath and be done. I know there's a lot of people out there like that as well, who are kind of forcing themselves out of their comfort zone to do that. So I'm always envious when I hear like, oh, Kristin, she's a natural. Yeah, just throw her up there. She'll be fine. All right. Well, enough of the Mutual Admiration Society, let's call it. Why don't we go ahead and wrap it up for this week? Kristin, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking out, part of your busy day to talk with us. I'm going to have a LinkedIn profile connection for you in our show notes for people to reach out to in case they have questions or comments or just want to talk improv ideas maybe. So I'll have that in our show notes. We'll also have all of our discount codes in the show notes, as well as they're always on our homepage, idacpodcast.com. Just scroll right on down there and you'll see everything we got active for the time. Like and subscribe. Hit us up on the YouTube channel. Like and subscribe there. Tell your friends, tell your enemies. Doesn't matter as long as they like and subscribe. I don't care who they are. And so with that, we'll go ahead and leave it for this week. Thanks everyone for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with y'all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.